slightly puzzled that given we've partly got into this situation by people spending too much and on borrowed money, we have the highest per capita household debt. I'm not talking about the government, I'm talking about us, the individuals. The highest per capita household debt in the world, indeed the highest in history. Why should people spend more? Shouldn't they be retrenching now? Shouldn't they be paying down this debt?
Well, I think you're in this subprime word. You're talking about people who can afford to spend spending, people who can't afford to spend not spending. In fact, illustrated by Colin Bergen's question during Prime Minister's questions about the kind of promotion of irresponsible debt, if I can put it like that, to people who clearly can't afford it. I think the most alarming thing about this whole situation is many of the banks, even today, don't really know about the quality of the people to whom they're lending and where the situation is. That's why this credit card review that's being referred to is so important. So the answer is a rather trite one, I'm afraid. I think people who can afford to should spend and go ahead, but people who can't shouldn't. Now, the question is, how do you make that judgment to ensure that people who can't, who are subprime from that point of view, are not lent the money? And that's the problem we have.
You see, Ken Clark, a lot of people will think Britain's now in a vulnerable position because we spent too much on borrowed money, and both individuals and government borrowed too much. So why is the solution that we should borrow more and spend more? I mean, isn't that pouring petrol on the flames?
I don't think we can borrow more. We should not be borrowing more, and we are pouring petrol on the flames a bit. Should people spend more? I think you've got to try and encourage those that can afford it to spend.
But
everybody needs credit sometime in their lives, sometimes quite regularly. But what we need is banks, as Charles said, to lend sensibly, commercially, to people satisfy them that they can afford it. Unfortunately, the British have got into a habit, like their government, of ignoring this. In 2007, we had a negative savings rate. That means people were actually running their savings down to spend the money to keep their living standards.
But you're kind of making the point of my questions, which is, if that's the case, and if we spent on borrowed money, as we did, shouldn't we be retrenching now? Because I tell you what I find as I speak to people of all income groups, they're frightened, and that makes them scared to spend.
I think the problem with the question, I mean it with all respect, is that the we of the question implies everybody behaving in roughly the same way. Whereas actually what you have is a society where of millions of households who can and should behave differently. At the same time, the financial institutions, the banks, have changed from the old day of the bank manager who knew their business, knew their family, whatever, to a very much more tick box type of approach where, and I get many complaints from my constituents, they've got projects they want and they feel that they're just not being understood in a proper way. And so the challenge is to get back into banking and understanding of who they're lending to and how.
Okay, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. We've got a few more things to squeeze in.
We have. It is a very, very busy day. Now, you might recall that we covered on this programme quite recently the government's new plan surrounding prostitution. Ministers want to criminalise